As dads, some days we feel like we have all the answers, and some days we feel like we don't have a clue. If that describes you, you're at the right place. This is the All Pro Dad Podcast. Hey, I'm your host, Ted Lowe, and each week on the All Pro Dad Podcast, we ask just one question, we explore the answer, talk about what we've gotten wrong and what we've occasionally gotten right. We talk about what the experts say, and then at the end of every episode, we give you just one simple but powerful pro move. Today, I have with me two other self-described, slightly above average dads.
Semi-pro?
Yeah, Mr. Buck Buchanan.
I'm working on it.
Yes, Mr. Jason Hood.
Thank you for having me.
Thanks for being on here, guys. It's good to see you again. This is good times.
Great to be here.
Buck.
Yeah.
What's our question of the episode?
Ted, our question for the day is, my kid is acting out. What do I do? Mm-hmm. Now, before we dive in, let's see what you guys think. What's something that's happened maybe when you were a kid that if you could put yourself in your dad's shoes, like what was he thinking? Like what were you doing? What maybe was he thinking?
Yeah. Well, my dad probably would have just asked me, what were you thinking? Which I find myself asking my son all the time. And I remember my answer, which is exactly my son's answer. I was like, oh yeah, you're 8. You're not thinking. Your brain is just on full tilt go mode. It's like, I do what I want when I won't.
Yeah.
And so that was kind of how I
just burning rubber.
I mean, it's just, he looks at you and just goes, what? I can't formulate the words. I just can't understand.
That wasn't doing anything. I think my dad would have probably been like, I do not know how to stop these kids from fighting. Like my brother and I, we were like, we fought all the time about everything, and it would get physical and the whole bit. And I think he would just get so frustrated. Like you know, this was back in the day when you get a spanking for fighting, which I don't know what message that's sending, but it was the 80s. And so
we don't hit around here. Yep.
Yeah, but you're going to get it.
Stop yelling.
It was all very dramatic too. Like all of a sudden you'd be like, what's happening? Who else is hitting me? Oh, it's my father. I don't know if I shouldn't say that. I'm not going to say that. Well,
that's all right.
What are you going to do? Buck, what's your answer to that?
Well, I mean, I'll tell you, I got whooped quite a bit.
Yeah.
So.
Same.
Yeah. So anyways, but I would say there was probably a time that if I would go back and ask my dad, he would probably say like, I don't even know what to do with this.
Yeah.
I'm just going to go pick him up and everything's going to be fine. But I ran away from home. It was catalyst from a fight with my sister.
How old are you?
Oh gosh. I was in elementary school. So I'm not sure. Probably, I would guess third grade.
Between K and 8.
Third, fourth grade, somewhere in there. So I had a fight with my sister and it ended with me yelling, I just want you to love me. And she said, well, I don't. And she slams the door. I loved my sister. I thought she was the coolest thing ever. She's an older sister. So she was the coolest. I was the dumbest, apparently. And so big fight. So I packed a satchel and went to my friend's house down the street and just was like, I'm running away. I'm never going home again. And apparently my friend's dad called my dad and was like, hey, just so you know, he's down here. It's fine. Like you can stay for a bit, but I'll probably send him home or if you want to come get him.
I don't know why, but I'm picturing you with a stick and a bandana.
It was. No, it really was. Because that's all I've seen.
Yeah.
That's all I've seen. I grew up with Saturday morning cartoons, and whenever someone ran away, they had a red bandana, put on a stick and like made a sandwich and left. And it was along the lines. I don't think it was a red bandana, but definitely a bag on a stick. I think it was my bat. Because I didn't really have a stick. So.
Can you imagine now if kids ran away from home, the alarms that would be going off? Yeah. It can't be a gig now anymore. What about you guys? Is there anything right now? Is there any kind of situation going on with your kids that you're just not sure how to handle?
I mean, I could tell you about one that I don't know if I handled it right, but I feel like I did. I feel like I got a couple like you go dads. Like when I was at the store and we were at GameStop. Okay. And for those of you that don't know, GameStop is a video game store. And my boys gravitated towards the Nintendo Switches that were out to be played. So I'm checking out. They're playing the Switches. I've already told them I'm checking out. It's time to go. Y'all should stop playing those. but just trying to leave a leash, a little bit of a leash. And then there was a couple other parents in the store and everything. And there was kind of a line forming behind me, and I'm checking out, and we get done. And I look over and I was like, all right, boys, come on. It's a small store. So, whatever. But then they didn't budge. And I'm like, guys. And so then I'm getting louder, and I'm getting increasingly louder. And I'm like, I've already determined that they're going to come at my call,
Right.
And so the call just keeps getting louder. And it's like, guys, come on. And so but then I did have a couple a mom just kind of gave me yeah, yeah. I mean, they're all behind me going yeah, I've been there, man. But right. So I'm in that situation. It's I didn't, and we even got in the car. We had a discussion about it. It's I don't want to have to raise my voice in public. That's not a very enjoyable thing for me as a parent. It's not enjoyable as an adult to even see other kids disobey their parents. When I see other kids disobey their parents, it's embarrassing for me to watch. And so, but it goes back to I've been there. I can kind of relate
right.
to the parent, just hang in there. But yeah, it's just tough.
Yeah, we're dealing with a lot of fighting at our house between brother and a younger brother and older sister too. So it's tough because we don't hold them to a different standard, but we do expect our oldest to act more maturely than our youngest. And it's hard for her to understand that we don't hold him to the same standard of maturity as we hold you. And so it's hard to get through to her and really help her understand that, we're calling you to be the bigger person because you have a little bit more control
right.
than he does, where he's just super impulsive, and we're trying to help him with that. And again, he's just like me when I was growing up, is just full speed all the time, brain's going 3,000 miles an hour, not thinking about anything. And he's very much like you, or I just want my sister to love me. And he does any and everything he can to get her attention. And it doesn't matter if it's bad attention or good attention.
Because she's the coolest.
She's the coolest.
There's something about older sisters that we're all
yeah. So he just wants her attention so badly. So he'll do whatever he can. And so we're trying to get him to understand that negative attention is bad. And it's only pushing her further away, but he can't understand the concept of all I know is I'm getting the attention. He doesn't know that it's bad attention or good attention. Yeah. And so it's just really hard because it puts us in a tough space with her because we're holding her to a higher standard when it comes to maturity, but not when it comes to just overall being kind to one another.
So there's situations, I think every dad's probably listening right now going, there's situations where hey, I'm asking my kids nicely, let's get to the car. I don't want to yell. Or, hey, our kids are fighting. No dad's resonating with that at all. But right. So there's these situations okay, I think most of us will hit this place to go, I don't know what to do here because whatever we're doing is not working. Whatever I'm doing is not working. And so when you guys hit those situations, or if you were given a dad advice, he comes to you and he says, I don't know what to do in the situation. What's your go-tos? Do you have any go-tos? Hey, I always do fill in the blank that's helpful.
I mean, for me in this situation, I try my best to just take a couple of breaths.
Right.
I mean, because for me, I get really frustrated in having the same conversations over and over and over again. I think this is something me and my wife both struggle with. All parents have to have the same conversation with their children over and over and over and over. And it's hard to remember that they're just learning. That's the hard part. And so for me, it's trying not to lose my cool, which is impossible sometimes, I feel like. And I feel like that's just remember that they're still young and they're still learning. That's what I try to tell myself. Right. Because a lot of times my brain wants them to understand it like they're an adult.
Right. The first time I say
right, exactly.
You get it now, right?
So your solution, when you hit these spots is let me back up, let me process, let me think, let me get some perspective. Yeah. Buck, what about you? You've hit those spots. I don't know what to do. It's not working.
I think for me, it's always been communication afterwards. And so I think having the conversation in the car after I got way too loud in GameStop for them to come on. I think me having the conversation with him afterwards has created, because I haven't ran into that situation again, at least not to that level. And so I feel like every time it's kind of lessening and lessening. But communicating to my boys what I'm feeling about the situation and what I'm trying to do, like what my goal is to accomplish in that situation. Because a lot of times they're not thinking about, we've got to be here at a certain time and we've got to do this and everything like that. And so if I'm communicating with them after the fact, I think it de-escalates the emotions with it, for me at least, and kind of starts that mending process between me and my kids that I've just had a fight with them, kind of, in a way, or they could view it that way. But communicating, the goals and the why as to why I kind of got upset that they weren't listening. But also just kind of like the respect level of like, I'm your father, and things like that. So I think the communication with them about the situation really helps when it comes to kind of bridging the gap of the next time we do this, we're not going to get here again,
Gotcha. So it feels like you guys are both talking about how do we become intentional and not reactive? How do we respond instead of react?
And I think it's important because I think a lot of dads will shut down after a fight like that, and they won't communicate why. What's the why behind they got mad? It might be a very legitimate why, but if a dad is kind of bad at communication, or or not really spending the time to communicate with their kids in that way, then I think you are sending a child off with, I just got yelled at for doing this, and I don't know why. So I'm either going to do it again because I don't understand, and forget that guy, or I'm going to create this false narrative around why I can't do something like this. And that's not really the real reason. So I think communication with your kids as to the why of parenting, I think really does help.
So it feels like there's a lot of processing. I don't want to think this through. I think we can get to these spots where we're literally stunned. Like, I don't know what to do. We got a call from our oldest one. He was probably 7 or 8. And we got a call from his teacher, says, we need to have a little meeting, which is never like great news. Like, we just wanted to let you know your boy is stellar. And he is stellar, but I thought, this is going to be bad. And then we went in and she explained that he and this other little boy had basically bullied this little girl. They didn't hit her, but they were hitting her with the words. And I mean, my wife, and it's our first, and we're like, this is unbelievable. This is the bipolar opposite of what we want to teach him. What have we done? Where have we gone wrong? And so we called one of our friends, and she asked a very important question. She said, is this a first time behavior? She says, because that's a really big deal. Maybe there's some pieces that he didn't understand, that he didn't know. Like, talk to him about it. Stay calm and talk to him about it. Buck, it's like what you were talking about. And what we discovered through talking, what he considered as teasing, as boy teasing, was anything but teasing to her. So it's really this teachable moment. And so I think I used to jump straight to, I'm going to let you get this lesson because the consequence is going to be so fill in the blank that you're going to never forget this again. And I think there's just those moments to go, that was just a helpful question for me. And it also de-escalated Nancy and I just to go, wait a minute. Okay. He doesn't do this all the time. This isn't like him.
Because you had to step back.
Yep.
It caused you to step back. There's been a couple times with my oldest son where, there's been a situation where he's been bullied or something that he didn't enjoy the situation or whatever, or someone wronged him. But then he would turn around and do it. And it's those moments where it's almost like he didn't even realize, because I think, even us thinking is like, we don't like being offended, but when we're kind of thinking about the flip side of that situation and it benefits us, we have a little bit easier time doing that thing that offended us before. Right. And so like, it's a lot of times where I have to bring that up to him of like, okay, do you remember a couple weeks ago, this kid at school did the exact same thing to you and you just did the same thing to someone else. And so, and then it was just like, how do you reconcile that? And he was kind of like,
Yeah.
Right. Helping him think
Our kids do
Yeah.
that to each other all the time. Like
Right.
they fight and they'll, if you're going to do that to me, like these words will come out of their mouth. Well, if you're going to do that to me, then I'm going to do this to you. I'm like,
Well, hold on.
would you like that? No. Okay. But it's justified. And that's what they're trying to do in their mind. They're trying to justify their actions.
Right.
And I think sometimes, it's hard as parents to help them understand, hey, what you're trying to do is you're trying to give yourself permission to act a certain way because you feel a certain way. And it's hard for kids to understand that concept. But I think what you said is key, is communicating to them. And you're going to have to communicate it to them 100 times because they're just not at a point where cognitively they can understand it yet.
Yeah.
And one day it'll click. One day they'll be like, oh, this is what Dad was talking about when I'm mean to somebody and then they're mean back to me. And then I feel justified in being mean back to them. It doesn't break the cycle. The cycle just keeps continuing.
Yeah.
Another filter that we kind of would use that someone gave us, everything for us with parenting was either a mentor, a friend, or a book. But one of the things that a teacher told us one time, she says, ask yourself, especially when they're smaller, was that just childish behavior or is that willful disobedience? I mean, were they just being a kid or they look you in the face and say, and that was super helpful for us because sometimes I would, discipline or talk about behaviors that were just a kid being a kid as if they had looked me straight in the eye and said, I'm going to do exactly what you told me not to do.
Yeah. Like, don't touch that. And then they look you straight in the eye and go,
right.
touch it.
Exactly.
Yeah, I feel like my kids have only one of my kids have done that, and it's the most disciplined one now. It's the older one. She looked at her mother one time and she was dropping her fork on the floor, and Stacy looked at her and she's like, "Don't drop that fork on the floor." And she literally picked it up off the table, looked her right in the eye, and dropped it again.
What you gonna do now, Mom?
How you going to do that?
I think, gosh, like situations like that, it's really tough. I think those are the times where I feel like every dad just feels helpless.
Yeah.
Because what are you going to do? You know, they're your kid. And so I think it just comes back to communicate, the disappointment or how it makes you feel. But it's tough.
I'm going to throw a scenario out there with you guys.
Yeah.
Tell me how you like to handle this. So let's say your 18-year-old daughter borrowed your car.
I would not like to handle this.
Yeah.
Okay. So
Pass.
she's
Next
borrowed,
scenario.
so she's borrowed your car and then she spends the night with a cousin and the cousin who's older, calls you the next morning and says, "Hey, I'm the bearer of bad news, but everybody's fine." And I went, "Taylor, get to the info here, friend." And she says, "Well, Teddy, she backed up and she kind of hit a car. And it's not that really big a deal, but I just wanted to let you know." And so
The car still rolls.
she said, "I wanted you to have a little time to process before you talk to Teddy," which ended up being a really good thing. But it really... So in that moment, okay, so cousins called you and told you instead of your daughter, how do you handle your kids just scratch the car? What's the go-to thing? Like, what's the steps that you would take to go, I want to respond, I don't want to react. What's your go-to on that moment? And that was all hypothetical, by the way.
Yeah.
Just because I used my daughter's name doesn't mean it has
That was
anything.
highly specifically hypothetical.
I mean, honestly, for me, situations like that are like, those are accidents, right? And going back to your response of like, was this like, what caused the accident, right? Was it you weren't paying attention? And I think accidents are going to happen. And the question is like, were you doing something you shouldn't have been doing intentionally, or did you just make a mistake? And so I think that's a good filter to put in place is did you do something intentionally? Did you make a choice that was intentional bad?
Being reckless.
Or were you just
willful disobedience?
Or did you just not pay attention and make a mistake? And so I made that actual mistake when I was in high school. I wanted to go visit my friends, and my mom had a friend that was over, and I took her car and I backed it straight into it. Not like and it just was I wasn't paying attention. And their response was to get super mad at me to yell at me, but it was because I was so mad that they wouldn't let me leave afterwards. But what they didn't understand was I wanted to leave so bad because I was so embarrassed.
Yeah.
I was so embarrassed, and I felt so bad about wrecking my mother's car and my mom's friend's car that I just wanted to get out of there. And they treated me like I was this super, super selfish kid, when I knew in my heart that I was so embarrassed that I just wanted to leave.
Yeah.
And so, but they treated me like oh, you just want to go, that all you care about is going to see your friends. Did I want to go see my friends? Of course. Did I wanted to do what I wanted to do? Yes, I did. But in my heart, like, I was crazy embarrassed. And I think about that situation every once in a while when my kids do something that on accident. And this happened actually this weekend. We were at a grocery store and my son had 2 big old bags of cornmeal. No idea why. I turn around.
We haven't made cornbread a day in our life.
So I turn around to the sound of the scale falling onto the ground, the weighted scale.
Yeah.
And I turn around and he's got 2 big bags of cornmeal in his hand and he's placing them back on the shelf. And his immediate reaction was, it was already broken. I was like, oh, okay. So the two 2-pound bags of cornmeal that you have in your hand had nothing to do with it. Nope, nothing.
Nope.
Nothing. And I'm like, that's where it gets, now he's making an intentional choice to not tell the truth.
Right.
Yeah.
It's okay that you made the mistake. It's okay that you knocked the shelf out. You're being a curious kid. Wonder what 2 pounds of cornmeal, how much does this weigh? I don't know. It says it on the bag, but whatever. We're going to weigh it anyway. But then he makes the choice to lie about what actually happened. So I really, I try to remember when things like that happen with my kids. I try to remember how I felt in that situation and how their reaction was opposite of what I was actually feeling inside. And I try to take that into consideration, that I don't always understand what my kids are thinking and feeling.
That's good. And I think one of the major points that I learned from the lesson of Teddy having an accident, or made me question, to say, why didn't she call me? Like, why did she get her cousin to do it? And so I want to make it so easy for them to come to me and tell me hard things. And I think that begins with just being calm.
Yeah. Well, and I think that's a good point is, when you're facing this situation, and by the way, I'm not sure how I would have naturally reacted having never heard this scenario before, but now this is good that we're talking about it, because I can maybe apply this somewhere else. Even though I don't have a daughter, I will have boys,
and they also will crash your things.
For sure will crash your car.
Well, I think that's a good point to make, is what's the situation? So we have to step back and we have to assess, okay, was it willful disobedience? Was it being stupid? Was it being crazy and everything? And it had a consequence to the reaction. Or was it purely an accident? I think in either way, for me, I would say, they're responsible. They're a responsible adult at this point. I would try to calmly say, okay, well, you need to take the car. You need to go get a quote for how much it's going to cost to fix it, and then bring it back. And then I think either way, I would make them do that, just so they can see and feel the process or whatever of what it costs or what it takes to fix something like this, and the real, money value behind it. And then at that point, if it's an accident, I might take it and just do it myself. But if it was them, then we go into maybe a little discussion on how much are you going to pay this? Or if I'm going to make them pay all of it, if it's not that bad,
That's good.
But something like this, because they're old enough that they need to know and feel the weight of the responsibility of something like having a car, or something like that.
And depending on the kid, that's the thing with her. I knew she was already going to be devastated about it, but I think, Jason, you made a good point. You went back to when they overreacted or they responded in a way that hurt. I think there's sometimes a good filter to say, how would I want my dad to respond in this situation?
Yeah.
We're going to wrap this episode up, but I want to give just a few more questions that have been helpful for us, and then we'll give the pro move.
Yeah.
What, if any, consequences should there be? I think we need to tie those to make them logical. The logical consequence, you got to have to pay for the car because it was the car situation. Was there any underlying issue that contributed to my kid's behavior? Behaviors are usually they aren't the problems, they're symptoms. Like, what's going on there? And what can I help my kid learn from this experience? Stay out of lecture mode and lock into curiosity. But I think what I've heard from you guys on this whole thing is, regardless of what the situation is, whether we know or not, we're talking about communicate with the kids and just stay calm and be the kind of dad you want your dad to be, or who you going to, at the end of this thing, go, I was proud of the way I handled that. I'm proud of, but giving ourselves space to do that too.
Or if you don't, then you address it later.
Totally.
I think that a lot of times we sit back and we're like, man, I did not handle that situation right. And then you just kind of move on. Versus going to your children. And I've done this a few times, and it is freeing actually to go to your kids and say, hey, I messed up. And a lot of times I leave that situation thinking, man, I hope that had as much impact on them as it had on me, because freely giving that up and admitting my mistake to them, I felt made us stronger in our relationship.
There you go.
Yeah.
That's a great way to end that, because that, if no other lesson, they've learned how to apologize at that point. And I think it's okay to say to our kids, but I'm stumped. I want to help you with this. I don't know, but I'm here. I'm not going anywhere, and we're going to figure it out together. It's good. Yeah. All right, Buck. Each week, as you know, we give a pro move of the episode.
It's true.
So what's the pro move?
Pro move for this episode is choose one situation with your kid that you are unsure how to handle, and run it through these questions, how to respond, and then put it into practice, I think.
Awesome. And they can find those questions in the show notes, right?
Yes, we will put those questions in the show notes. There you go.
Well, thank you guys. And as always, thanks for listening. We know you and your kids will be glad you did. Thanks for listening to the All Pro Dad podcast. All Pro Dad is the fatherhood program of the nonprofit Family First. Along with our motherhood program, iMom, we exist to help you love your family well. Subscribe to our daily email, the All Pro Dad Play of the Day, by going to allprodad.com/subscribe and get daily powerful and practical fatherhood tips in your inbox. The All Pro Dad podcast is hosted by me, Ted Lowe, produced by Bobby Lewis.